Colorado Territory, 1882. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside Millbrook Station, its wheels grinding against the frozen earth with a sound like breaking bones. Inside, pressed against the worn leather seat, sat a woman who hadn't spoken a word in 3 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Helena Montgomery clutched her carpetbag with white knuckles, her dark hair pinned so severely it pulled at her temples. She wore a navy traveling dress that had once been fine, now wrinkled from weeks of travel and spotted with dust from the Colorado plains. Her green eyes, once bright with laughter, now held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much. The driver's voice boomed from outside. "Millbrook Station! End of the line, folks!" Helena didn't move, even when the other passengers began. Gathering their belongings and shuffling toward the door, she remained frozen in place. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the handle of her bag, and she pressed her lips together in a thin line that had become as permanent as a scar. "Miss, are you getting off here?" The driver peered through the doorway, his weathered face creased with impatience. Helena nodded once, a sharp, mechanical movement. She rose slowly, as if her bones had aged decades in the span of her journey, and stepped down from the coach onto the wooden platform. Millbrook was smaller than she had imagined, a handful of buildings clustered around the train depot like sheep, huddling against the wind. The general store, a saloon with peeling paint, a church with a crooked steeple, and beyond them scattered houses that looked no bigger than matchboxes against the vast Colorado sky. She stood on the platform as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her alone with her carpetbag and a letter that had brought her here. The letter was worn soft from handling, creased and refolded so many times the ink had begun to fade. It was signed by Marcus Webb, rancher, widower, seeking a wife for companionship and help with his young daughter. Helena had written to him from Kansas, where she had been living in her sister's attic, slowly disappearing into herself after what had happened in Chicago. She had told him she was quiet by nature, hard-working, and good with children. She had not told him why she no longer spoke. The wind cut across the platform with a bite that made her pull her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. November in Colorado was harsher than November in Kansas, and far harsher than the gentle autumns she remembered from her childhood in Ohio before everything changed. "You, Miss Montgomery?" The voice made her jump. She turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the general store. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a brown coat that had seen better days and a hat pulled low over dark hair. His boots were scuffed and practical, and he moved with the easy gait of someone comfortable in his own skin. Helena nodded again, that same careful movement. "I'm Jake Crawford," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Marcus Webb asked me to meet the stage. He's dealing with a sick calf and couldn't make it himself." Jake Crawford had kind eyes, she noticed, brown like coffee, with lines at the corners that spoke of someone who smiled often. His face was sun-weathered but young, probably not much older than her own 24 years. When he spoke, his voice carried the slow cadence of someone who chose his words carefully. "He's real sorry he couldn't come himself," Jake continued when Helena didn't respond. "Wanted to make sure you knew you were expected. Been looking forward to meeting you." Helena's stomach tightened. She had not considered that Marcus Webb might have expectations beyond what she had written in her careful, reserved letters. She had told him she was seeking a practical arrangement, nothing more. But men, she had learned, often heard what they wanted to hear. "Can I help you with that?" Jake gestured toward her carpetbag. Helena shook her head quickly, clutching the bag closer to her chest. It contained everything she owned in the world: 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's Bible, and a small wooden box that held the few things she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. Jake didn't press. Instead, he walked to where a wagon waited, hitched to a patient chestnut mare. It's about a 20-minute ride to the Webb place, he said, helping her up onto the seat. Road's a bit rough, but Rosie here knows the way. As they pulled away from Millbrook Station, Jake tried to make conversation. He pointed out landmarks, the old mill that hadn't run since the drought of '79, the creek that swelled with snowmelt each spring, the ridge where elk came down to graze in the early morning. Helena listened without responding, watching the landscape roll past in shades of brown and gold. "You come far?" Jake asked eventually. Helena held up 2 fingers, then made a small gesture that might have meant far enough, or too far, or nothing. "At all." Jake nodded, as if her silence was perfectly normal. "Kansas," Marcus said. "It must be different from Colorado." Helena looked at him from the corner of her eye. Most men grew uncomfortable with her silence, filling it with nervous chatter, or demanding responses she couldn't give. But Jake seemed content to let the quiet settle between them like snow. The Webb Ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant cluster of buildings, then resolving into a 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, a red barn, and several outbuildings, scattered across a valley that stretched toward the mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney, and chickens pecked in the yard near a vegetable garden that had been put to bed for winter. "There's Marcus," Jake said, pointing toward the barn where a man emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. Marcus Webb was not what Helena had expected. His letters had been formal, businesslike, giving no hint of personality beyond his practical needs. In person, he was a sturdy man in his 30s, with prematurely grey hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked. With his strength, he wore suspenders over a flannel shirt, and his face, while not unkind, had the set expression of a man who had learned to manage disappointment. "Miss Montgomery," he said, approaching the wagon. His voice was deeper than Jake's, more formal. "Welcome to Colorado." Helena climbed down from the wagon before either man could offer assistance. She stood facing Marcus Webb, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. Marcus studied her for a moment, taking in her silence, her careful posture, the way she held herself as if braced for a blow. "You had a long journey," he said finally. "You must be tired." Helena nodded. "Well," Marcus said, glancing at Jake, then back to Helena, "I suppose we should get you settled. Sarah's been looking forward to meeting you." At the mention of his daughter, something in Marcus's expression softened. He led Helena toward the house, Jake following with her carpetbag, despite her earlier protests. The farmhouse was larger inside than it had appeared from the wagon. The main room held a stone fireplace, a dining table that could seat 6, and several comfortable chairs arranged near the hearth. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but there was a masculine starkness to it, as if a woman's touch had been missing for some time. "Sarah," Marcus called toward the staircase, "come meet Miss Montgomery." Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and a girl of perhaps 8 appeared, her brown hair in braids and her dress stained with what looked like blackberry juice. She stopped short when she saw Helena, her eyes wide with curiosity. "This is my daughter, Sarah," Marcus said. "Sarah, this is Miss Montgomery. She's come to be your new mother." The words hit Helena like a physical blow. New mother. In his letters, Marcus had spoken of needing help with his daughter, of wanting companionship, but he had never used those words. Helena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation that had robbed her of speech 3 months ago. Sarah stepped forward, unaware of Helena's distress. "Are you really going to marry Papa?" she asked, her voice carrying the directness of a child. Helena looked at the girl's expectant face, then at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression that might have been hope or calculation. She opened her mouth, tried to form words, tried to explain that she wasn't ready for this, that she might never be ready. But nothing came. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Sarah's smile faded, and Marcus's face grew stern. "She's tired from traveling," Jake said quietly. "Might take some time to get settled." Marcus nodded curtly. Of course. Sarah, show Miss Montgomery to the guest room. She can rest before supper. Sarah brightened again and bounded toward the stairs. Come on! I helped Papa make the bed with Mama's quilt. It's real pretty. Helena followed the girl upstairs, aware of the men's voices drifting up from below. The guest room was small but pleasant, with a window that looked out over the valley and a bed covered with a quilt in shades of blue and yellow. Someone had placed a wash basin and pitcher on the dresser, and a small vase held the last wildflowers of the season. Papa picked those, Sarah said, noticing Helena's gaze. He wanted everything to be nice for you. He's been cleaning for weeks. She plopped down on the bed and swung her legs. Are you really going to be my new mama? I've been wanting one for so long. Jenny Miller has a mama who makes her hair ribbons and tells her stories. I asked Papa for stories, but he says he's not good at them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Helena sat carefully in the room's single chair, still clutching her carpetbag. She looked at this eager, lonely child and felt her heart contract with something that might have been love or might have been terror. You don't talk much, do you? Sarah observed. That's okay, sometimes I talk too much. Papa says I could talk the ears off a scarecrow. She giggled at her own joke, then grew serious. Will you tell me stories, even if you don't talk much? Helena managed a small nod, and Sarah's face lit up like sunrise. I knew you would. I just knew it. Sarah jumped up and danced around the small room. This is going to be the best thing ever. Left alone when Sarah finally skipped downstairs, Helena unpacked her few belongings with mechanical precision. She hung her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe, placed her nightgown in the bureau drawer, and set her mother's Bible on the bedside table. The wooden box she kept with her, holding it in her lap as she sat on the edge of the bed. Through the window, she could see Jake and Marcus talking near the barn. Their conversation appeared intense, Jake gesturing with his hands, while Marcus stood with his arms crossed. She wondered what they were saying, whether Jake was explaining her strangeness, her broken silence. The wooden box felt warm in her hands. Inside were the things that connected her to the person she used to be, a locket with her parents' picture, a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, and a letter that had changed everything. She didn't open the box. She couldn't, not yet. A knock at the door made her start. Miss Montgomery, Marcus's voice came through the wood. May I come in? Helena set the box on the bed and went to open the door. Marcus stood in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. I wanted to speak with you before supper, he said. May I? Helena stepped aside to let him enter. He remained near the door, as if aware that his presence in her bedroom might be improper. Jake tells me you've had a difficult time, Marcus began. That you might need some adjustment period. Helena nodded, grateful that Jake had understood something she couldn't explain. I want you to know that I'm a patient man, Marcus continued. I didn't bring you here expecting immediate intimacy. I know these arrangements take time, but I do hope that eventually we can build something together, a partnership at the very least. Helena's chest tightened again. Partnership implied cooperation, communication, sharing. All things that required speech, required her to be the person she had been before Chicago, before everything collapsed. I have one request, Marcus said. Sarah has been without a mother for 3 years. She's been looking forward to this for weeks. I'd appreciate it if you could try to engage with her, even if it's difficult for you. Helena thought of the eager child downstairs, of the loneliness in her voice when she spoke of wanting stories and hair ribbons. Despite her own fractured state, she felt drawn to Sarah's uncomplicated need. She nodded again, more firmly this time. Good, Marcus said. That's all I ask for now. We'll take everything else as it comes. After he left, Helena remained standing by the window, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The Colorado sky blazed with colors she had never seen. In Kansas, deep purples and brilliant oranges that made the whole world look like a painting. Below, she saw Jake unhitching his horse from the fence post. He mounted with easy grace and rode toward the road, but before he reached it, he turned back toward the house. From her window, Helena couldn't see his expression, but something in his posture suggested he was looking up at her room. She stepped back from the window, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't name. Supper was a quiet affair. Marcus had prepared beef stew and cornbread, simple fare but well cooked. Sarah chattered throughout the meal, filling the silence with stories about her schoolmates, her pet rabbit, and the new foal in the barn. Helena listened, occasionally nodding or smiling slightly, which seemed to encourage the girl tremendously. "Miss Montgomery likes my stories, Papa," Sarah announced. "I can tell because she smiles when I talk about Buttercup getting into the vegetable garden." Marcus looked at Helena across the table. "Is that so?" Helena managed another small nod. It was easier than she had expected, this minimal interaction. Sarah required so little encouragement to fill the space with her bright presence. After supper, Sarah insisted on showing Helena around the house. They visited the parlor with its piano that no one played anymore, the kitchen with its large cast-iron stove, and the small room that served as Marcus's office. Everything was functional, well-maintained, but lacking the warmth that came from a woman's presence. "Mama used to put flowers everywhere," Sarah said wistfully as they stood in the parlor. "The house smelled like roses all summer long. Do you like flowers, Miss Montgomery?" Helena nodded, remembering her own mother's garden, the way their house in Ohio had overflowed with blooms from spring to fall. "Good. When spring comes, we can plant flowers together. Jake says there's a place by the creek where wild roses grow. He could show us." At the mention of Jake, Helena felt that strange flutter in her chest again. She pushed it away, focusing instead on Sarah's excited planning. That night, Helena lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the Colorado night, wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl, the creak of the house settling. It was quieter than Kansas, where her sister's house had been close to the railroad tracks. Quieter than Chicago, where the noise of the city had been constant, overwhelming. In the silence, her thoughts drifted to the events that had brought her here. The wedding that wasn't, the scandal that followed, the slow dissolution of everything. She had believed about herself and the world. She had loved once, completely and foolishly, and it had nearly destroyed her. The wooden box sat on the dresser, moonlight gleaming off its polished surface. Inside was the letter that had shattered. Her world written in a hand she had trusted absolutely. She hadn't read it since the day it arrived, but she remembered every word, every cruel revelation that had stolen her voice and her faith in love. But here, in this strange house with a lonely widower and his eager daughter, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of a different kind of life, not the passionate romance she had dreamed of, but something steadier, safer, a place where her silence might be accepted, where she could slowly piece herself back together. Outside her window, she could hear the distant sound of hoofbeats on the road, someone riding late, probably heading home from town. She wondered if it was Jake Crawford, and why the thought made her pulse quicken despite herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations to navigate. Marcus would expect progress. Toward the partnership he envisioned, Sarah would want stories and attention. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Helena carried the memory of kind brown eyes and a voice that didn't demand more than she could give. She pulled the quilt up to her chin, breathing in the scent of lavender that still clung to the fabric. Someone had loved this quilt, had chosen each piece of fabric with care. Perhaps, in time, she could learn to love it too, to love this place and these people in her own broken way. But first, she had to find a way to speak again, to let her voice return from whatever distant place it had fled. And that seemed as impossible as moving the mountains that stood guard over the valley, purple and eternal, against the star-filled sky. Helena woke before dawn to the sound of boots on the porch below. Through her window, she could see Marcus heading toward the barn, a lantern swinging in his hand. The sky was the color of pewter, with stars still visible above the mountain peaks. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 dresses, a brown wool that had seen better days but was practical for the Colorado cold. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of pinning her hair, but in the small mirror above the dresser, she hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. When had her face become so thin, so hollow around the eyes? Downstairs, the kitchen was empty but warm. Someone had already started the fire in the stove, and coffee sat brewing in a blue enamel pot. Helena found herself drawn to the window that faced the barn, watching Marcus move between the stalls with practiced efficiency. His movements were economical, purposeful, a man who wasted neither time nor energy. "Papa always gets up early," Sarah's voice came from behind her. "He says cows. Don't care if you're tired." Helena turned to find the girl sitting at the kitchen table, already dressed for the day in a green calico dress, with her hair in slightly crooked braids. She was eating a piece of bread spread thick with butter and honey. "I tried to do my hair myself," Sarah said, touching one of the uneven braids. "Papa does his best, but he's not very good at girl things. Mama used to make my braids perfect every morning." Helena approached slowly and gestured toward Sarah's hair, raising her eyebrows. "In a question, would you fix them?" Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, would you please?" Helena nodded and moved behind Sarah's chair. She had learned to braid hair on her younger cousins back in Ohio, fingers that remembered the rhythm even after years of disuse. As she worked, loosening the crooked braids and beginning again, Sarah chattered happily. Jenny Miller says her mama taught her to braid wildflowers into her hair for the harvest dance. "Do you think you could teach me that? I've been wanting to learn, but Papa says he doesn't know about flowers in hair." Helena's hands stilled for a moment. She remembered her own mother teaching her to weave daisies into her hair for church picnics, the way the white petals had felt cool against her scalp. Those memories belonged to a different person, a girl who had believed in happy endings and forever love. She finished the braids quickly, making them even and neat. Sarah reached up to touch them, beaming. "They're perfect. Papa, come see." Marcus had entered through the kitchen door, stamping his boots clean of mud and hay. He looked tired, Helena noticed, with lines around his eyes that spoke of early mornings and late nights. "Very nice," he said, glancing at Sarah's hair. His eyes met Helena's briefly. "Thank you." Helena nodded, stepping back to give him space to pour his coffee. The kitchen suddenly felt too small with all 3 of them in it, too intimate. She moved toward the window again, looking out at the yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. "Miss Montgomery," Marcus said, "I'll be riding out to check the north pasture today. Sarah has school, but if you'd like to come along see more of the land." Helena shook her head quickly. The thought of being alone with Marcus for hours, of his expectations and the weight of conversation she couldn't provide, made her chest tighten. "Another time, then," Marcus said, but she could hear the disappointment in his voice. After Marcus left and Sarah skipped off to school with her lunch pail and primer, Helena found herself alone in the house for the first time since her arrival. The silence was different here than it had been in her sister's attic in Kansas. There, she had felt buried alive. Here, the quiet seemed to breathe around her, filled with the small sounds of a living place. The tick of the mantel clock, the settling of wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves. She moved through the room slowly, trying to understand this place that was supposed to become her home. In the parlor, she found a photograph on the mantelpiece, Marcus and a woman with kind eyes and Sarah's bright smile. The woman wore a wedding dress and Marcus looked younger, less weathered by loss. Helena picked up the photograph, studying. The woman's face. Margaret Webb had been beautiful in a quiet way, with fair hair and the sort of gentle expression that suggested she had been much loved. No wonder Sarah missed her so desperately. No wonder Marcus seemed lost in his own house. In Marcus's office, she found account books filled with careful notations about cattle and feed prices, letters from cattle buyers, and a small stack of mail-order bride correspondence. Her own letters were there, her careful formal words that had convinced him she would be suitable. Had he known she was broken when he wrote back? Had he cared? The kitchen drew her back repeatedly throughout the morning. It was the heart of the house, she realized, the place where life actually happened. The stove that heated the whole downstairs, the tables scarred from years of family meals, the shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and fruits. Someone had canned extensively for winter. Green beans, tomatoes, peaches that glowed like amber in their glass containers. Helena found herself opening cupboards, taking inventory. Flour, sugar, salt, baking powder, dried beans and rice in large containers, everything needed to feed a family through the Colorado winter. She wondered who had done the preserving. Marcus seemed capable, but the neat labels and precise organization suggested a woman's hand. Around midday, she heard horses approaching and looked out to see Jake Crawford riding up to the house leading a second horse. Her pulse quickened unexpectedly, and she smoothed her skirts before going to the door. "Afternoon, Miss Montgomery," Jake said, touching his hat. "Marcus asked me to check on you, see if you needed anything from town." Helena shook her head, then hesitated. There were things she needed, needle and thread, proper winter gloves, a few personal items, but the thought of trying to communicate her needs felt overwhelming. Jake seemed to understand her hesitation. "Mind if I water the horses? It's a dusty ride from town." Helena nodded and watched him lead the animals to the trough near the barn. He moved with the same easy confidence she had noticed the day before, comfortable in his surroundings. When he finished with the horses, he approached the porch where she stood. Marcus mentioned, "You might be feeling a bit overwhelmed," he said carefully. "New place, new people, takes time to settle in." Helena looked at him sharply. How much had Marcus told him? How much had Jake guessed? "I was wondering," Jake continued, "if you might like to see some of the country around here. Not far, just up to the ridge where you can see the whole valley. Sometimes a different view helps put things in perspective." Helena considered this. The house felt confining, full of another woman's presence and a man's expectations. The idea of open space, of mountains and sky, called to something in her that had been buried for months. She nodded slowly. "Good," Jake smiled, and his whole face changed, becoming younger and more open. "I'll saddle Rosie for you. She's gentle as a lamb." Helena hadn't ridden in over a year, not since before her engagement, before her world collapsed. But as Jake helped her mount the patient mare, muscle memory returned. She arranged her skirts as modestly as possible and gripped the reins with hands that remembered how to hold them. They rode in comfortable silence up a winding trail that led away from the ranch buildings and into the foothills. The November air was crisp but not bitter, carrying the scent of pine and dry grass. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly blue, broken only by wisps of clouds that cast moving shadows. Across the golden valley below. "There," Jake said when they reached a flat outcropping of rock. The whole web spread. Helena looked down at the ranch laid out below them like a child's toy set. The house and barn looked impossibly small against the vastness of the land. Fields stretched in neat rectangles, and she could see the dark dots of cattle scattered across the pastures. Beyond it all, the mountains rose like a wall against the sky, their peaks already touched with snow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jake said, dismounting and moving to help her down. "I never get tired of this view." Helena slid from the saddle, accepting his steadying hand for just a moment before stepping away. She walked to the edge of the overlook, drinking in the sight of so much open space. In Chicago, she had felt trapped by buildings and crowds. In Kansas, her sister's house had felt like a prison. But here, with the wind in her face and the world spread out below, she felt something loosen in her chest. "Marcus is a good man," Jake said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Lost his way some after Margaret died, but he's finding it again. Sarah's been the light of his life these past 3 years. Helena glanced at him, wondering why he was telling her this. "He's hoping for a fresh start," Jake continued, "something to build on. But he's not a man who pushes. He'll wait for you to come to him." Helena turned to look at Jake directly. His brown eyes were serious, kind, but there was something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. "I know it's not my place to say," Jake said, "but you seem like someone who's been hurt. Takes time to heal from that kind of thing. Don't let anyone rush you into something you're not ready for." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first time since Chicago that anyone had acknowledged her pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. She opened her mouth, wanting to thank him, wanting to explain, but no words came. Jake seemed to understand. "You don't have to say anything. Sometimes silence says more than words anyway." They stood in comfortable quiet, watching a hawk circle high above the valley. Helena felt safer than she had in months, standing next to this man who asked nothing from her but offered the gift of understanding. "We should head back," Jake said eventually. "Sarah will be home from school soon, and she gets worried if she doesn't know where everyone is." The ride back to the ranch felt too short. Helena found herself wishing they could stay on the ridge forever, away from expectations and the weight of her own broken promises. But as they approached the house, she saw Sarah running across the yard toward them, her school bag bouncing against her hip. "Miss Montgomery, Jake, did you go riding? I wish I could have come. Did you see the eagle's nest up on the ridge?" Jake laughed. "Slow down, little miss. One question at a time." Helena dismounted and found herself smiling at Sarah's enthusiasm. It was easier to smile than to speak, and the girl seemed to accept this as natural. "Papa's not back yet," Sarah announced. "Want to see my arithmetic? I got all the sums right today, and Miss Peterson said I'm improving." Helena nodded, following Sarah into the house. The girl chattered about her school day while Helena prepared an early supper, grateful for the distraction of chopping vegetables and tending the stove. Cooking was something she could do without speaking, a way to contribute that felt safe. When Marcus returned as the sun was setting, he found them in the kitchen together. Sarah was showing Helena her slate, while Helena stirred a pot of soup that filled the house with savory aromas. "Smells good in here," Marcus said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. He looked tired but pleased, glancing between Helena and his daughter with something that might have been hope. "Miss Montgomery made soup," Sarah announced, "and she fixed my braids this morning, and Jake took her riding up to the ridge." Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "Is that so?" Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hadn't considered how her afternoon with Jake might look to Marcus, what assumptions he might make. Jake mentioned he was checking the boundary markers. "Up that way," Marcus said carefully. "Good to have company on the trail." Helena nodded, relieved that he seemed to understand it had been nothing improper. During supper, Sarah dominated the conversation as usual. But Helena noticed Marcus watching her more carefully now. She could feel him trying to gauge her comfort, level, her willingness to engage with their life here. When Sarah asked her to help with her reading after the meal, Helena found herself nodding almost eagerly. They sat together by the fire while Marcus worked on his account books. Sarah read slowly from her primer, stumbling over longer words. When she struggled with beautiful, Helena pointed to the letters one by one, helping her sound it out. Sarah's face lit up when she got it right. "You're a good teacher," Marcus said quietly from his desk. Sarah's reading has improved more in 2 days than it did in the past month. Helena felt a warm glow at the praise. Teaching Sarah felt natural, right in a way that little else had since her arrival. The girl's eagerness to learn reminded her of her own childhood when the world had seemed full of possibilities. Later, as Helena tucked Sarah into bed, the girl caught her hand. "I'm glad you came," Sarah whispered. "I know you're sad about something, but I think you'll be happy here. Papa and I will take good care of you." Helena's throat tightened. This child, who barely knew her, was offering comfort and protection. She squeezed Sarah's hand gently, wishing she could find the words to express her gratitude. Back downstairs, she found Marcus banking the fire for the night. They stood in the warm kitchen, the silence between them no longer quite so awkward. "Thank you," Marcus said. "For Sarah, she's happier than I've seen her in months." Helena nodded, understanding that this was what he needed from her, what he valued most. Not passionate love or even companionship, but someone who could mother his daughter, who could bring light back into their home. "I know this is difficult for you," Marcus continued. "Jake mentioned you might need more time to adjust. I want you to know there's no pressure. We can take this as slowly as you need." Helena felt grateful tears threaten. Marcus was offering her the gift of time, of space to heal. She managed a small smile, the first genuine one she had given him. "Good," Marcus said, his own expression softening. "That's good." As Helena climbed the stairs to her room that night, she felt something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. Sarah's uncomplicated affection, Marcus's patient kindness, and Jake's understanding presence were slowly chipping away at the wall she had built around her heart. In her room, she sat on the bed and opened the wooden box for the first time since leaving Kansas. Inside, along with her other treasures, lay the letter that had destroyed her faith in love. She unfolded it carefully, reading the words that had once cut so deep. "My dearest Helena, I find I cannot go through with our marriage. I have met someone, else someone who can give me the passion and excitement I need. You're too quiet, too reserved for a man of my temperament. I need a woman who can match my fire." The words still hurt, but not with the same devastating force. In the safety of this Colorado farmhouse, surrounded by people who valued kindness over passion, Helena began to see that perhaps there were different kinds of love, different ways to build a life. She folded the letter and put it back in the box. Tomorrow she will try again to find her place in this new world. And perhaps, in time, she would find her voice as well. The wind started before dawn on Helena's 5th day at the Webb Ranch, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds racing across the yard like phantom horses. She woke to the sound of shutters, banging, and Marcus's voice outside, sharp with urgency as he called to the hired hands about securing the barn doors. By the time she dressed and made her way downstairs, the sky had taken on an ominous yellow-green color that made her stomach clench with unease. She had seen storms in Kansas, but nothing quite like the wild fury building beyond the mountains. "It's going to be a bad one," Marcus said when he came inside, his hair whipped wild by the wind. First real blizzard of the season. Could last 3 days. Sarah pressed her face against the kitchen window, watching the cottonwoods bend and sway. "Will the chickens be safe, Papa?" "They're in the hen house," Marcus assured her, but Helena could hear the tension in his voice. "Everything's battened down tight." Helena busied herself preparing breakfast, grateful for tasks that kept her hands occupied. The rising wind made her nervous in ways she couldn't explain, stirring memories of another storm, another time when the world had felt like it was coming apart around her. Just as she was setting plates on the table, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Through the window, she saw Jake Crawford fighting to control his horse against the gusting wind. Marcus was already reaching for his coat. "Trouble up at the Morrison place," Jake called when Marcus met him on the porch. "Their barn roof's coming off, and they've got sick cattle trapped inside. Tom Morrison's asking for help." Helena watched Marcus's face tighten with concern. The Morrisons were neighbors, good people who would do the same for him without question. But leaving during a storm like this was dangerous. "How many men does Tom have with him?" Marcus asked. "Just his boy, and the kid's barely 15. Rest of his hands left for Denver last week." Marcus nodded grimly. "I'll get my gear." Helena felt panic flutter in her chest. The idea of Marcus riding out into that howling wind, of being left alone, with Sarah if something happened to him, made her hands shake as she gripped the back of a chair. "I'll come with you," Jake said. "No." Marcus shook his head. "Someone needs to stay here. If this storm gets worse, they might need help too." Helena stepped forward before she could stop herself, reaching out to touch Marcus's arm. Both men looked at her in surprise. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact with anyone since her arrival. Marcus's expression softened when he saw the fear in her eyes. "I'll be careful," he said quietly. "Morrison's place is only 3 miles. I know the trail even in bad weather." Helena wanted to beg him not to go, to tell him that she couldn't bear the thought of losing another person who mattered to her. But the words remained locked inside, trapped behind the wall of silence that had become her prison. "I'll look after them," Jake said, understanding the passing between the two men. "Get going before it gets worse." Within minutes, Marcus was mounted and disappearing into the swirling, grey-white chaos of the approaching storm. Helena stood at the window long after he vanished from sight, her hand pressed against the cold glass. "He'll be all right," Jake said softly behind her. "Marcus knows this country better than anyone." Helena turned to find him watching her with those kind brown eyes, Sarah clinging to his side with obvious worry. "Will Papa really be safe?" Sarah asked, her usual brightness dimmed by fear. "Your papa's the toughest man I know," Jake assured her, "but we need to make sure we're ready for whatever this storm brings. Think you can help me check the windows and doors?" Sarah nodded eagerly, always ready to feel useful. As they moved through the house, testing latches and adjusting shutters, Helena found herself studying Jake's competent movements. He checked each potential weak point with practiced efficiency, the sort of man who planned for trouble before it arrived. By mid-morning, the storm hit with full force. Snow drove horizontally past the windows, so thick Helena couldn't see the barn 20 yards away. The wind howled around the house like a living thing, finding every crack and crevice to rattle and moan through. Helena kept busy in the kitchen, baking bread and preparing a large pot of stew that would feed them for days if necessary. The familiar rhythm of kneading dough helped calm her nerves, though she jumped at every particularly loud gust of wind. "Smells like heaven in here," Jake said, coming in from checking the back door for the 3rd time. Snow clung to his coat and hat, melting into puddles on the kitchen floor. Helena handed him a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly as he took it. The touch sent an unexpected warmth up her arm, and she pulled back quickly, confused by her own reaction. "Thank you," Jake said, seemingly unaware of her sudden discomfort. "This is good coffee. Marcus always did make it too strong." Elena managed a small smile. She had noticed Marcus's preference for coffee that could strip paint and had adjusted accordingly when she took over the morning routine. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, dragging a quilt behind her. "The parlor's getting cold," she announced. "Even with the fire going." Jake frowned. "Wind's probably pulling the heat right up the chimney. We might be better off staying in the kitchen where the stove keeps things warm." Helena nodded and began gathering supplies to make the kitchen more comfortable for a long siege. She pulled cushions from the parlor chairs, found extra blankets in the linen closet, and arranged everything near the stove where the heat was strongest. As the day wore on, the storm only intensified. The house creaked and groaned under the assault of wind and snow, and several times Helena heard crashes from outside. Tree branches, she hoped, and not parts of the buildings. Jake kept them distracted with stories of other storms he'd weathered, tales of being snowed in for a week in a line shack with nothing but beans and hardtack to eat. Sarah listened with wide eyes, occasionally glancing toward the window as if expecting to see her father materialize from the white wall of snow. "Tell us about when you were little," Sarah said suddenly to Helena. "Were there big storms where you lived?" Helena hesitated. She had been dreading personal questions, but Sarah's innocent curiosity deserved some kind of answer. She thought for a moment, then held up her hands to indicate a small size. "You were little when you saw your first big storm," Sarah guessed. Helena nodded, then gestured toward the east. "In Ohio?" Jake asked quietly. Another nod. Helena closed her eyes briefly, remembering herself at 6 years old, huddled with her siblings in the root cellar while a tornado tore through their county. Her father had held them all close, telling stories to keep them calm while the world raged overhead. "Were you scared?" Sarah asked. Helena nodded honestly, then reached over to smooth Sarah's hair in a comforting gesture. The girl leaned into the touch, and Helena felt her heart squeeze with affection for this brave little person. As afternoon faded into evening, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Helena served supper from the big pot of stew, and they ate by lamplight while snow continued to pile against the windows. The house felt isolated from the world, cut off from everything beyond its walls. "I wish Papa was here," Sarah said quietly, voicing what they were all thinking. "He's probably warm and safe at the Morrison place by now," Jake assured her, "likely drinking Tom Morrison's terrible coffee and playing cards with young Billy." Helena appreciated his efforts to keep Sarah's spirits up, but she could see the worry in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. 3 miles might as well have been 300 in weather like this. That night they all slept in the kitchen on makeshift beds of quilts and cushions. Helena lay awake, listening to the storm's fury, Sarah curled trustingly against her side, and Jake keeping watch near the stove. Despite her fear for Marcus, she felt oddly safe in this warm circle of lamplight, protected not just by solid walls, but by the care of good people. Sometime during the darkest part of the night, Helena woke to find Jake adding wood to the stove, moving quietly to avoid disturbing Sarah. In the orange glow of the fire, his face looked younger, gentler than it did in daylight. "Can't sleep either," he whispered when he noticed her watching. Helena shook her head. The storm was still raging, possibly even stronger than before. Jake settled back down near the stove, close enough that she could see his face in the firelight. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "What did you do before you came here?" "Before you answered Marcus's letter?" Helena felt her chest tighten. It was a simple question, the sort of thing any friend might ask, but it touched on the time when she had been whole, before everything fell apart. She held up her hands, mimicking the motion of playing piano. "You played piano?" Jake's voice held genuine interest. "That's wonderful. Marcus mentioned there's a piano in the parlor that hasn't been touched since Margaret died." Helena nodded, remembering the silent instrument she had noticed on her first day. She had been trained in music from childhood, had once dreamed of teaching piano to support herself before marriage became her only apparent option. "Maybe you could play for Sarah sometime," Jake suggested. "She'd love that," Helena considered. The idea of making music again, of filling the house with something besides silence, was both appealing and terrifying. Music had once been her voice when words failed her. Perhaps it could be again. A particularly violent gust of wind shook the house, rattling dishes in the cupboards. Sarah stirred against Helena's side, murmuring in her sleep. "It's all right," Jake said softly, though Helena wasn't sure if he was talking to the sleeping child or to her. "We're safe here." Helena wanted to believe him, but safety had proven so fragile in her experience. People left, promises broke, love turned to betrayal without warning. Yet lying here in the warm kitchen with this kind man keeping watch, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of trust. The second day of the storm dawned grey and wild, with no sign of the blizzard weakening. If anything, the wind seemed stronger, and the snow was piling so high against the windows that the house felt buried alive. Helena woke to find Jake already up and assessing their situation. Sarah was still sleeping, exhausted by the stress of worrying about her father. "Water's still running," Jake reported quietly, "but we should fill every container we can find, just in case the pipes freeze, and we'll need to ration the firewood. This storm could last another day or two." Helena nodded and set about gathering pots, buckets, and jars to fill with water. The mundane task helped keep her anxiety at bay, though she found herself frequently glancing toward the windows, as if she could somehow see through the white wall to where Marcus might be struggling. Around midday, Jake made his way to the barn to check on the animals. Helena watched from the kitchen window as he disappeared into the swirling snow, a rope tied around his waist and anchored to the porch post. The few minutes he was gone felt like hours. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots and shaking ice from his coat, his face was grim. "How are they?" Helena asked with her eyes, gesturing toward the barn. "Animals are fine," Jake said, "but there's a problem with the roof. Some of the snow's starting to come through where the winds worked a few shingles loose. If this keeps up much longer—" Helena understood. A roof collapse could trap or kill the livestock, and without the animals the ranch couldn't survive. She saw Jake weighing his options, calculating risks the way Marcus would have done. "I might need to go up there," Jake said finally. "Clear some of the snow load before it gets too heavy." Helena grabbed his arm before he could move toward the door, her eyes wide with alarm. The idea of him climbing onto that roof in this storm, of risking his life for the sake of cattle and horses, terrified her. Jake looked down at her hand on his arm, then into her frightened face. "I have to," he said gently. "If that roof goes, we lose everything Marcus has worked for." Helena shook her head frantically, trying to communicate her fear, her need for him to stay safe. She couldn't lose another person who mattered to her, especially not through her own silence, her inability to speak the words that might convince him to wait. "Hey," Jake said, covering her hand with his own, "look at me." Helena met his eyes, seeing warmth and understanding there that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I'll be careful," Jake promised. "I won't take any unnecessary risks, but sometimes we have to act even when we're scared, even when it's dangerous. That's what being part of a family means." Family. The word hit Helena like a physical blow. This man who had known her less than a week was already thinking of her as family, worth protecting and including in the hard decisions that life demanded. She wanted to tell him that she couldn't bear to lose him, that somewhere in the past few days he had become important to her in ways she didn't understand. She wanted to say that the thought of Marcus returning to find tragedy had struck while he was away would destroy them all. Instead, she squeezed his hand once, firmly, trying to put all her words into that simple touch. Jake understood. He always seemed to understand. "I'll wait until the wind dies down some," he said, "and I'll tie myself to the barn the whole time. Nothing's going to happen to me, Helena." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it, in his warm voice, made something flutter deep in her chest. She realized that in thinking of him as family, she had begun to love this gentle cowboy, who asked nothing of her, but offered everything in return. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the warm kitchen, something had changed between them, something that would matter long after the snow melted and spring returned to the Colorado mountains. The wind finally quieted just before dawn on the third day, leaving behind an eerie stillness that felt almost more ominous than the storms. Fury. Helena woke to pale sunlight filtering through snow-crusted windows and the blessed absence of howling wind. Jake was already awake, standing at the kitchen window surveying the damage. Snow had drifted against the house so high it reached the windowsills, and the yard looked like an alien landscape of white curves and hidden obstacles. "It's over," Sarah whispered, pressing against Helena's side. "Does that mean Papa can come home now?" Helena squeezed the girl's hand, hoping it was true. The silence outside felt fragile, as if the storm might return at any moment, but for now they had a reprieve. Jake turned from the window, his face thoughtful. "I need to check that barn roof while the weather holds. The wind may have stopped, but there's still too much snow load up there." Helena's stomach clenched with renewed fear. In daylight, the danger seemed even more real. She watched Jake gather rope and tools, her hands twisting together as she fought the urge to physically prevent him from leaving. "I'll be fine," Jake said, noticing her distress. "But I need you to do something for me." Helena raised her eyebrows in question. "If something goes wrong," Jake said quietly, glancing towards Sarah to make sure she wasn't listening, "you need to get to town. Follow the fence lines south until you reach the main road, then head east. It's about 5 miles, but you can make it if you have to." Helena shook her head violently. The idea of leaving him if he was hurt, of taking Sarah and fleeing into the snow-covered wilderness, was unthinkable. "Promise me," Jake insisted, his brown eyes serious. "Sarah needs to be safe above everything else. That's what Marcus would want." Reluctantly, Helena nodded. She understood duty, even when it tore at her heart. Jake bundled up in his heavy coat and Marcus's spare gloves, the rope coiled over his shoulder like a mountaineer's gear. At the door, he paused and looked back at Helena with an expression that made her breath catch. "If I don't make it back," he said softly, "I want you to know that meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in years." Before Helena could react, he was gone, closing the door firmly behind him. She pressed her face to the window, watching his dark figure move carefully across the snow-covered yard toward the barn. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he disappeared. Around the building's corner. "What's Jake doing?" Sarah asked, joining Helena at the window. Helena pointed toward the barn and mimed something falling, then shook her head to indicate danger. "He's fixing the roof so it won't fall down," Sarah interpreted. "Jake's good at fixing things. He fixed our water pump last summer when Papa couldn't figure out what was wrong with it." Helena tried to take comfort in Sarah's confidence, but as the minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of Jake, her anxiety grew into full-blown panic. She found herself pacing the kitchen, wringing her hands and jumping at every small sound. When Sarah asked for breakfast, Helena automatically began preparing eggs and biscuits, but her attention remained fixed on the window. She burned the first batch of biscuits and had to start over, her hands shaking so badly she could barely crack the eggs. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Jake appeared around the corner of the barn. Helena's knees went weak with relief, and she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. He was walking normally, seemed uninjured, and even from a distance she could see him smiling. When he came through the kitchen door, stomping snow from his boots, Helena rushed to him without thinking. She grabbed his coat with both hands, looking him over frantically for signs of injury. "I'm all right," Jake said gently, covering her hands with his own. "Everything's fine. The roof held, and I was able to clear most of the snow." Helena sagged against him for just a moment, overwhelmed by relief and the solid warmth of his presence. She became suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the way his hands felt covering hers, of the concern in his eyes as he looked down at her. She stepped back quickly, heat flooding her cheeks. This was Marcus's intended wife, she reminded herself. She had no right to feel this way about another man, no matter how kind he was. But Jake's expression suggested he had felt something too. A connection that went beyond simple friendship or neighborly concern. The air between them seemed charged, with possibilities that neither could voice. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah's bright voice broke the tension, and they stepped apart guiltily. "Everyone's fine," Jake assured her, his voice only slightly rough. "Barn's solid as ever." Around midday, they heard the distant sound of bells through the crisp air. Sarah ran to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. "Sleigh bells," she cried. "Someone's coming!" Helena's heart leaped. It had to be Marcus, finally making his way home through the snow. She smoothed her hair and checked her appearance in the kitchen's small mirror, suddenly nervous about seeing him again after the intimacy of the past 3 days. But as the sleigh drew closer, Helena could see it carried more than one person. Marcus was driving, but beside him sat a woman Helena didn't recognize, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat and laughing at something Marcus had said. Jake frowned as he watched the approaching sleigh. "That's Virginia Morrison," he said quietly. "Tom, Morrison's sister-in-law. She was visiting from Denver when the storm hit." Helena felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy. The woman was clearly beautiful, even from a distance, and there was something about the way she sat close to Marcus, the way they seemed to be enjoying each other's company, that made Helena's chest tighten. Sarah bounced excitedly as the sleigh pulled into the yard. "Papa's home! Papa's home!" She ran outside without her coat, and Helena watched through the window as Marcus swept his daughter into a fierce embrace. Over Sarah's head, his eyes found the kitchen window where Helena stood, and he raised a hand in greeting that seemed somehow formal, distant. Helena stepped back from the window, suddenly uncertain of her place in this homecoming. During the storm, she had begun to feel like part of the family, but now, seeing Marcus with another woman, she remembered that she was still essentially a stranger here, a mail-order bride whose position was far from secure. Jake must have sensed her discomfort because he moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Virginia's been staying at the Morrison place for 2 weeks," he said quietly. "She probably needed a ride back to town." Helena nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed while Marcus was away, and not just her growing feelings for Jake. When Marcus entered the kitchen a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots and unwinding his scarf, Helena noticed immediately that he looked different. Younger somehow, more animated than she had seen him since her arrival. "Helena," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I hope you weren't too worried. The storm was worse than anyone expected." Helena shook her head, indicating she had understood the necessity of his absence, but she found herself studying his face, looking for signs of what had happened during his 3 days away. "Jake took good care of us," Sarah announced, launching into an excited recounting of their storm adventures. "He told us stories and helped Helena make the kitchen all cozy, and he fixed the barn roof so it wouldn't fall down." Marcus's eyes flicked between Jake and Helena thought she caught a flash of something unreadable in his expression. Suspicion? Relief? It was gone too quickly to interpret. "I'm grateful," Marcus said to Jake. "I know it wasn't easy being responsible for them during a storm like that." "It wasn't a burden," Jake replied, his voice carefully neutral. "They're good company." Helena busied herself preparing coffee and warming leftover stew, listening to Marcus describe the challenges they had faced at the Morrison place. The roof of their barn had partially collapsed, as Jake had feared might happen here, and it had taken all hands working together to save the trapped cattle. "Virginia was invaluable," Marcus said, accepting a cup of coffee from Helena. "She's not the pampered city woman I expected, worked right alongside us, never complained once about the conditions." Helena felt that stab of jealousy again, sharper this time. Virginia Morrison was clearly everything Helena was not. Talkative, capable in a crisis, able to work alongside men as an equal partner. Everything Marcus probably needed in a wife. "She'll be staying in town until the road's clear enough for the stage," Marcus continued. "Dr. Peterson is putting her up at his house." "That's nice," Jake said, but Helena caught the way his eyes flicked toward her. gauging her reaction. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table sharing a late supper, Helena found herself feeling like an outsider in what had become her temporary home. Marcus told stories of his time at the Morrison place, frequently mentioning Virginia's quick thinking or helpfulness. Sarah hung on every word, delighted to have her father back and full of questions about the adventure. Helena contributed nothing to the conversation, of course, but for the first time since her arrival, her silence felt heavy, problematic. She watched Marcus's animated face as he spoke and realized that she had never seen him this way before, relaxed, confident, fully engaged with life. Whatever had happened during those 3 days away from the ranch, it had changed him. And Helena suspected that change had everything to do with Virginia Morrison. Later, after Sarah had been tucked into bed with stories of her father's storm adventures, Helena found herself alone in the kitchen with Marcus. Jake had excused himself to check on his own cabin, which had been empty during the storm. "I want to thank you," Marcus said, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Jake told me how you cared for Sarah, how you kept her calm and safe. It means everything to me. I've been thinking," Marcus continued, his voice careful, "about our arrangement, about what we both expected when you came here." Helena's heart began to race. She had been dreading this conversation, the moment when Marcus would realize she wasn't what he needed, that she might never be able to give him the partnership he sought. "You've been nothing but kind to Sarah," Marcus said, "and I can see that you care for her, but I wonder if we might both benefit from taking more time to consider our options." Helena looked at him sharply. Was he suggesting that their engagement be called off? Part of her felt relieved at the thought, but another part felt rejected, unwanted. "Virginia mentioned that she knows several families in Denver who are looking for governesses," Marcus continued. "Educated women who could teach children and help manage households. With your obvious skill with Sarah and your musical background—" Helena's hands flew to her throat. He was offering her a way out, a respectable position that would remove her from his life cleanly. But it also meant leaving Sarah, leaving this place that had begun to feel like home, leaving Jake. "It's just a suggestion," Marcus said quickly, misinterpreting her distress. "Nothing that needs to be decided immediately. But I thought you should know that you have options." Helena managed a nod, though her mind was reeling. Marcus was being kind, offering her freedom from an arrangement that clearly wasn't working for either of them, but the thought of starting over again, of being alone in another strange city, filled her with despair. "Think about it," Marcus said, gently. "There's no pressure. Whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here as long as you need it." As Helena climbed the stairs to her room that night, she felt more confused than ever. Marcus's offer was generous, probably the best solution for everyone involved, but it would mean giving up the first place she had felt safe since Chicago, the first people who had accepted her silence without trying to fix or change her, and it would mean leaving Jake just when she was beginning to understand what she felt for him. In her room, she sat on the bed and opened the wooden box again. The letter from her former fiancé seemed less important now. Its cruel words faded by time and new experiences. But it reminded her of why she had come here in the first place, to escape the wreckage of her old life and build something new. The question was, what did she want that new life to look like? And did she have the courage to reach for it, even if it meant risking her heart again? Outside her window, snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in fresh white silence. Somewhere in that silence, Helena would have to find her voice, not just to speak, but to choose the direction of her own life. For the first time since Chicago, she felt ready to try. 3 days after the storm, Virginia Morrison came calling. Helena was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard the jingle of harness bells approaching the house. Through the window, she watched a smart little buggy pull into the yard, driven by a woman in a burgundy traveling dress that managed to look elegant, despite the muddy roads. Virginia Morrison was even more beautiful up close than she had appeared from a distance. Golden hair swept up in the latest fashion, bright blue eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of confident bearing that came from knowing exactly where one stood in the world. She moved with purpose, Helena noticed, like someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Mrs. Morrison," Sarah called, running out to greet their visitor. "Did you come to see Papa?" "Hello, darling," Virginia said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of an Eastern education. "I did hope to speak with your father, and I was very much looking forward to meeting Miss Montgomery." Helena wiped flour from her hands and smoothed her simple blue dress, acutely aware of how plain she must look compared to this vision of sophistication. When Marcus emerged from the barn to help Virginia with her horse, Helena watched through the window as the woman placed her gloved hand on his arm, standing closer than necessary while they talked. "Miss Montgomery," Virginia said when she entered the kitchen moments later, "what a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Marcus has told me so much about you." Helena managed a small curtsy, uncertain of the proper etiquette for greeting her. "Potential replacement. I do hope you'll forgive my boldness in calling," Virginia continued, removing her gloves with practiced grace. "But I wanted to speak with you about the opportunity Marcus mentioned. The governess position in Denver." Helena's stomach clenched. So Virginia had been the one to suggest it, not Marcus acting independently. The realization stung more than she cared to admit. "The Whitmore family is quite prominent," Virginia went on, settling herself at the kitchen table as if she belonged there. "Banking interests, you know. They have 3 children who need instruction in music and literature. The salary is quite generous, and you would have your own quarters in their mansion on Capitol Hill." Helena poured coffee with hands that barely trembled, proud of her composure even as her world shifted beneath her feet. "I took the liberty of writing to Mrs. Whitmore about you," Virginia said, accepting the cup with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I described your obvious refinement and your way with children. She's quite interested in meeting you." "Papa!" Sarah burst through the kitchen door, her face flushed with excitement. "Jake's here, and he's brought his fiddle." Helena's pulse quickened at the mention of Jake's name. She hadn't seen him since the morning after the storm, when he'd left to check on his own cabin and hadn't returned. She had begun to wonder if he was avoiding her, perhaps regretting the moment of connection they had shared. "A fiddle?" Virginia's eyebrows rose with interest. "How rustic." Marcus entered behind Sarah, followed by Jake carrying a battered violin case. Helena felt her breath catch at the sight of him. 3 days of not seeing him had made her realize how much she had come to depend on his quiet presence, his understanding glances. "Jake," Virginia said warmly, rising from her chair, "what a delightful surprise. I didn't know you were musical." "Ma'am," Jake nodded politely, but Helena noticed how his eyes sought hers across the room. When their gazes met, something passed between them that made her cheeks warm. "I brought this for Helena," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "Marcus mentioned she played piano, thought she might like to try some music." "How thoughtful," Virginia said, though her tone suggested she found it presumptuous rather than kind. Helena approached the fiddle case slowly, her hands trembling, as Jake opened it to reveal a beautiful instrument, its wood glowing like honey in the kitchen lamplight. "It was my grandfather's," Jake said quietly. "He taught me to play, but I'm not much good at it anymore. Figured it might be better in proper hands." Helena lifted the violin reverently, feeling the smooth wood, the tension of the strings. It had been years since she had held an instrument, and this one seemed to call to something deep inside her chest. "Do you know Beautiful Dreamer?" Sarah asked eagerly. "It was Mama's favorite song." Helena positioned the violin under her chin, her muscle memory guiding her movements. She drew the bow across the strings experimentally, wincing slightly at the sound. The instrument needed tuning, but even out of tune, it sang with a voice. She had forgotten she missed. As she adjusted the pegs and tested the strings, Helena became aware that everyone was watching her. Marcus with surprise, Virginia with something that might have been calculation, Sarah with open delight, and Jake with an expression so tender it made her heart race. When the violin was finally in tune, Helena lifted the bow again. For a moment, she hesitated, overcome by the weight of expectation, the fear that she had lost this part of herself along with her voice. Then she began to play. The melody flowed from the strings like water, sad and sweet and achingly beautiful. It was "Beautiful Dreamer," as Sarah had requested, but Helena's interpretation carried depths of longing that transformed the simple song into something profound. Her eyes closed as the music took hold of her, expressing everything she couldn't say, all the love and loss and hope that lived locked inside her chest. When the last note faded, the kitchen was silent, except for the soft sound of Sarah sniffling. "That was Mama's song," the little girl whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, "but it was even prettier than when she played it." Helena opened her eyes to find everyone staring at her with something approaching awe. Even Virginia looked shaken, her composure cracked for the first time since her arrival. "That was—" Marcus began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find words. "Extraordinary," Virginia finished, though she sounded more troubled than pleased by Helena's performance. Helena lowered the violin, suddenly self-conscious. She had revealed too much of herself, exposed feelings she wasn't ready to acknowledge. But as she looked at Jake, she saw understanding in his eyes, recognition of the pain and beauty she had poured into the music. "Play another," Sarah begged. "Please." Helena shook her head gently, overwhelmed by the emotions the music had stirred. She needed time to process what had just happened, to understand why playing again had felt like coming back to life. "Perhaps another time," Marcus said, seeing her distress. "Music like that shouldn't be rushed." Virginia rose from her chair, smoothing her skirts with hands that Helena noticed were not quite steady. "Well," she said brightly, "I should be getting back to town. But Miss Montgomery, do think about what we discussed. A talent like yours shouldn't be wasted in—" She gestured around the simple kitchen, leaving the sentence unfinished, but its meaning clear. After Virginia left, the kitchen felt strangely empty, despite being full of people. Sarah chattered excitedly about the music, but Helena barely heard her. She was acutely aware of Jake's presence, of the way he kept glancing at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I should go," Jake said finally. "Let you folks get back to your evening." "Stay for supper," Marcus said, but there was something perfunctory about the invitation, as if he felt obligated to offer, but hoped it would be declined. "Another time," Jake replied, his eyes on Helena, "but I'd like Miss Montgomery to keep the fiddle if she's willing. It should be played by someone who understands it." Helena nodded gratefully, clutching the instrument to her chest like a lifeline. That night, after Sarah had been tucked into bed with promises of more music tomorrow, Helena found herself alone with Marcus in the kitchen. He sat at the table with his coffee, staring into the cup as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet formed. "You never mentioned you were that accomplished," he said finally. Helena set down her own cup, uncertain how to respond. She had mentioned her musical background in her letters, but there was a difference between saying you played piano and demonstrating the kind of soul-deep artistry she had revealed that afternoon. "Virginia's right, you know," Marcus continued. "A talent like yours deserves better than this." He gestured around the kitchen, much as Virginia had done. "The Whitmore position would give you opportunities I never could." Helena felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Marcus was trying to be kind, but his words stung. Did he truly believe she was too good for his simple life, or was he simply trying to ease his own conscience as he chose Virginia over her? "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," Marcus said, his voice careful, "about what we both want, what we both need. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll help you get there. If you want to go to Denver, I'll pay for your travel. If you want to stay here as Sarah's governess, we can work out an arrangement. And if you want to fulfill our original agreement—" He trailed off, leaving the unspoken option hanging in the air. Helena realized he was offering her a choice, but his tone suggested which option he preferred. "Virginia's been very clear about her interest in making a life here," Marcus said quietly. "She's everything I thought I needed in a wife, strong, capable, able to be a true partner. And Sarah already adores her." Helena's heart clenched at this last statement. It was true. Sarah had lit up around Virginia, drawn to her confident warmth in a way she never had been with Helena's quiet presence. "But," Marcus continued, "she's not you." Helena looked up sharply, surprised by the admission. "You have something Virginia doesn't," Marcus said, meeting her eyes. "A gentleness, a depth. When you played today, I saw a side of you I never knew existed. And I realized that maybe what I thought I needed and what I actually need might be different things." Helena felt tears threaten. Marcus was offering her what she had originally come for: marriage, security, a place in his life. But now that the offer was on the table, she realized how much had changed inside her. The woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 3 weeks ago would have accepted gratefully. But that woman had been running from love, not toward it. "I need to know," Marcus said gently. "What do you want, Helena? Not what you think you should want, or what would be practical, but what would make you happy." It was the first time anyone had asked her that question since Chicago. What would make her happy? The answer came to her with startling clarity, but it wasn't one she could give to Marcus. What would make her happy was Jake's gentle hands and understanding eyes, his quiet strength, and the way he seemed to see into her soul. What would make her happy was finding her voice again, not just musically, but in every way that mattered. Helena stood from the table, too agitated to sit still. She moved to the window, looking out at the dark shapes of the mountains against the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Jake was probably sitting by his own fire, thinking about the music she had played, about the moment when their eyes met across the kitchen and everything changed. "Take your time," Marcus said behind her. "There's no rush to decide." But Helena, she turned to look at him. "Whatever you choose, I want you to choose it for the right reasons. Not out of fear or obligation, but because it's what you truly want." As Helena climbed the stairs to her room that night, she carried Jake's fiddle with her. In the privacy of her small space, she played softly, letting the music express the tumult of emotions she couldn't voice. The violin sang of longing and uncertainty, of love discovered, and choices that would change everything. Through her window, she could see a distant light that might have been Jake's cabin. The sight made her chest ache with possibility and fear in equal measure. For the first time since Chicago, she knew what she wanted. The question was whether she had the courage to reach for it. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Helena was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard horses approaching. To her surprise, it was the Morrison family. Tom Morrison, his wife Beth, and their teenage son Billy. "Morning, Helena," Beth Morrison called out cheerfully. She was a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." Helena shook her head, gesturing for them to go around to the front door. She followed, curious about this unexpected visit. Marcus emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tom, Beth, good to see you. How are things after the storm?" "Getting by," Tom said, dismounting stiffly. "Barn's going to need a complete rebuild come spring, but we saved most of the cattle. That's what matters." "We actually came to see Miss Montgomery," Beth said, smiling at Helena. "Virginia told us about her musical talents, and we have a proposition." Helena felt her stomach clench. Another opportunity being arranged without her input, another person trying to manage her life. The church social is next Saturday, Beth continued. We're raising money to help rebuild our barn, and we thought if Miss Montgomery would be willing to perform, it might draw a bigger crowd. People would pay good money to hear real music. Helena looked around at the expectant faces. Marcus nodded. Encouragingly, Sarah bounced with excitement, and even young Billy Morrison seemed interested. She plays like an angel, Sarah announced. Better than anyone I ever heard. Would you consider it? Beth asked gently. It would mean so much to her family and to the whole community. Helena felt panic rise in her chest. Playing in the privacy of the kitchen was one thing, but performing for a crowd of strangers was entirely different. What if her nerve failed? What if she couldn't produce the same magic she had found yesterday? She'll do it, Sarah said confidently. Won't you, Helena? Helena looked at the little girl's trusting face, then at Marcus's encouraging smile. These people had been nothing but kind to her, had accepted her silence and embraced her presence in their lives. How could she refuse to help when they needed her? Slowly, Helena nodded. Wonderful. Beth clapped her hands together. This is going to be the best church social we've ever had. As the Morrisons rode away, making plans for Saturday's event, Helena felt a mixture of terror and anticipation. She would have to perform in public for the first time in over a year, would have to trust that the music would flow through her the way it had yesterday. But more than that, she realized this might be her chance to find her voice in a different way. Music had always been her language of the heart. Perhaps through the violin, she could finally express the truth that words had failed to carry. The truth about what she wanted, about who she was becoming, about the love that was growing stronger with each passing day, despite every reason it shouldn't exist. Saturday couldn't come soon enough, and yet she dreaded its arrival with every fiber of her being. Saturday arrived with crisp December air and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Helena stood before the mirror in her room, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out her eyes and had once been her favorite. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, and she had to start over twice when the pins scattered to the floor. Today, she will perform in front of the entire Millbrook community. Today, she would stand before strangers and let them hear her heart through Jake's grandfather's violin. The thought made her stomach churn with anxiety, but beneath the fear lay something else, anticipation. "Helena!" Sarah's voice carried up the stairs. "Virginia's here with her buggy!" Helena's heart sank. She had hoped to ride to the church social with Marcus and Sarah, to have their familiar presence as support. But Virginia had apparently offered to escort her, probably to ensure Helena understood her place in the shifting dynamics of their small community. Helena gathered the violin case and her music, simple folk songs and hymns she had spent the week practicing, and made her way downstairs. In the kitchen, Virginia stood resplendent in a wine-colored silk dress that had clearly come from Denver's finest shops. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had probably taken hours to achieve. "Don't you look lovely?" Virginia said, though her smile seemed forced. "That dress is quite charming." Helena managed a polite nod, acutely aware of how plain her homemade dress appeared next to Virginia's finery. "I thought we could have a little chat on the way to church," Virginia continued brightly. "Girl talk, you know." Marcus appeared in the doorway, dressed in his Sunday best with his hair slicked back. He looked handsome, Helena had to admit, though not in the way that made her pulse quicken. That reaction seemed reserved for a certain gentle cowboy with warm brown eyes. "You sure you don't want to ride with us?" Marcus asked, his concern genuine. "Nonsense," Virginia laughed. "Helena and I need some time to get properly acquainted. Besides, I have some wonderful news to share about the Denver position." Helena felt trapped. She couldn't very well refuse Virginia's offer without seeming rude, but the prospect of being alone with this woman, who clearly saw her as an obstacle, filled her with dread. The ride to church was as uncomfortable as Helena had anticipated. Virginia kept up a steady stream of chatter about the weather, the social, and the various families they would meet today. But beneath the pleasantries, Helena sensed a sharper purpose. "I received a letter from Mrs. Whitmore yesterday," Virginia said as they neared the church. "She's quite eager to meet you. In fact, she's planning a trip to Colorado Springs next month and could easily extend it to Millbrook. We could arrange an interview." Helena stared at the road ahead, wishing she could simply disappear. "It really is a wonderful opportunity," Virginia pressed. "Much better than remaining in an uncertain situation here." The words hit their mark. Virginia was making it clear that Helena's position at the Webb Ranch was temporary at best, that she would be wise to accept the Denver offer before Marcus inevitably chose his more suitable bride. "I know you care for Sarah," Virginia continued, her voice softening slightly, "but surely you can see that she needs a mother who can truly guide her into womanhood, someone who can teach her proper deportment, introduce her to the right sort of people when the time comes." Helena felt each word like a small cut. Virginia was right in many ways. Sarah would benefit from a mother who could navigate society, who could open doors that Helena's quiet nature would leave forever closed. "And Marcus," Virginia said, playing her final card, "deserves a wife who can be a true partner, someone who can help him expand the ranch, entertain business associates, give him the support he needs to build something greater than what he has now." The church came into view just as Helena felt she might break from the weight of Virginia's reasonable arguments. The building was already surrounded by wagons and buggies, and people in their Sunday finest were streaming through the doors. Helena's stomach lurched at the sight of so many potential audience members. Inside the church, the usual pews had been pushed aside to create an open space. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and someone had arranged chairs in semicircles, facing a small platform where Helena would perform. The noise level was considerable, children running between the adults, women chattering about recipes and local news, men discussing cattle prices and the chances of more snow. Helena felt overwhelmed by the crowd and the expectations. She clutched the violin case tighter, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in agreeing to this. "Helena!" Beth Morrison approached with a warm smile. "We're so grateful you agreed to play for us. The whole community is talking about it." Helena managed a weak smile in return. "Don't look so nervous, dear," Beth said kindly. "Music is meant to be shared. You'll do wonderfully." Across the room, Helena caught sight of Jake talking with a group of ranchers near the food tables. He was dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair combed back from his face. When he noticed her looking, he excused himself from his conversation and made his way over. "Miss Montgomery," he said formally, though his eyes were warm. "You look beautiful today." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. The compliment, simple as it was, meant more coming from him than all of Virginia's elaborate flattery. "Nervous?" Jake asked quietly. Helena nodded, grateful that he understood without lengthy explanation. "Just remember," Jake said, stepping closer, so only she could hear, "the music isn't about them, it's about you, about what you need to say. Let the violin speak for you." His words steadied her more than any amount of reassurance about her technical skill could have done. Jake understood that for her, music was language, communication, truth. "Everyone, please take your seats," Tom Morrison called out, and the crowd began settling into the arranged chairs. Helena noticed that Virginia had positioned herself in the front row next to Marcus and Sarah, the picture of a proper family. The sight made her chest tighten with something that might have been loss or might have been relief. Jake caught her elbow gently. "I'll be right here," he said, gesturing to a chair in the second row where he could see her clearly. "If you need anything, if you want to stop, just look at me." Helena nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. Tom Morrison introduced her with kind words about her talent and generosity in helping their family rebuild after the storm. As Helena walked to the small platform, violin case in hand, she felt dozens of eyes following her movements. The silence was expectant, hopeful, and absolutely terrifying. She opened the case with fingers that trembled only slightly and lifted out Jake's grandfather's violin. The instrument felt warm and familiar in her hands now, like an old friend offering support. Helena positioned the violin under her chin and raised the bow. For a moment, she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sea of faces watching her. Then her eyes found Jake's, and she saw nothing but encouragement and understanding there. She began with amazing grace, a hymn everyone would recognize, letting the familiar melody flow from the strings with simple beauty. As the notes filled the church, she felt some of her tension ease. The audience was with her, she realized, drawn into the music rather than judging her performance. The second piece was Shenandoah, a folk song that spoke of longing and journey, of love that transcended distance and time. As she played, Helena thought of her own journey from Ohio to Kansas to this Colorado church, of all the loves she had lost and the one she was afraid to claim. For her third selection, Helena chose something she had never played in public before, a piece her mother had taught her, a Scottish air called "The Water is Wide." It was a song about separation, about love that couldn't be reached, and as Helena played it, she poured all her heartbreak and hope into the strings. The melody wove through the church like a living thing, touching hearts and stirring memories. Helena saw tears on many faces, recognition of their own losses and longings reflected in the music. Even Virginia seemed affected, her composed expression showing cracks of genuine emotion. But it was Jake's face that held Helena's attention. He watched her with such intensity, such understanding, that she felt as though he were seeing straight into her soul. And in that moment, she realized that she was telling him everything through the music, her fear, her love, her desperate hope that somehow they might find a way to be together. As the last note of "The Water is Wide" faded into silence, the church remained hushed for a long moment. Then applause erupted, warm and appreciative and genuine. Helena lowered the violin, feeling drained but somehow cleansed, as if she had finally spoken truths that had been locked inside her for too long. "Beautiful, just beautiful," Beth Morrison said, approaching the platform with tears in her eyes. "I've never heard anything so moving." Others crowded around, offering compliments and thanks. Helena smiled and nodded, accepting their praise, but feeling oddly detached from it all. The performance had been about more than entertainment or charity. It had been a declaration, a moment of truth that changed everything. When the crowd finally dispersed to enjoy the social aspects of the gathering, Helena found herself alone with her violin for a moment. She was carefully placing it back in its case when she sensed someone approaching. "That was extraordinary," a man's voice said behind her. Helena turned to find a stranger, a well-dressed gentleman with graying hair and kind eyes. He was clearly not local, his clothing and bearing suggesting city origins. "I'm Dr. William Harrison," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm visiting from Denver, and I happen to be in town for the social. I must say, I haven't heard playing of that caliber since my last visit to the Opera House." Helena shook his hand politely, unsure how to respond to such lavish praise. "I understand you're considering a position as a governess," Dr. Harrison continued. "If I may be so bold, I think you're aiming far too low. With talent like yours, you could be teaching music at the conservatory level, perhaps even performing professionally." Helena's eyes widened. She had never considered such possibilities, had always thought of her music as a personal comfort rather than a potential career. "I know the director of the Denver Music Academy," Dr. Harrison said, reaching into his vest pocket for a calling card. "With a recommendation from me, I'm certain they would offer you a position. The salary would be quite substantial, and you would be surrounded by other musicians, people who understand the artistic temperament." Helena took the card with shaking hands. Dr. Harrison was offering her something she had never dared dream of. A life built around music, independence, respect for her talents. It was everything Virginia's governess position was not. "Think about it," Dr. Harrison said gently. "A gift like yours shouldn't be hidden away. It should be shared with the world." As Dr. Harrison moved away to rejoin the social, Helena stared down at the calling card in her hands. 3 different futures lay before her now: the safety of marriage to Marcus, the security of the governess position, or the thrilling uncertainty of a musical career in Denver. But as she looked across the room and saw Jake watching her with those warm brown eyes, Helena realized that none of those choices mattered as much as the one she was afraid to make. The choice that had nothing to do with security or career and everything to do with love. The social continued around her. Children playing games, adults sharing food and conversation, the comfortable rhythm of community life. Helena moved through it all like a sleepwalker, smiling and nodding at compliments, but her mind spinning with possibility and fear. She was standing near the refreshment table, picking at a piece of cake she didn't really want, when Jake appeared beside her. "You look like you could use some air," he said quietly. Helena nodded gratefully. The church had grown warm and close with so many people, and her emotions felt too large for the space. Jake led her outside to a quiet spot behind the church where a small garden provided privacy from the social's bustle. The December air was crisp but not bitter, and Helena breathed deeply, trying to clear her head. "That was incredible," Jake said, turning to face her. "What you did in there. It was like watching someone's soul made visible." Helena looked at him, this man who saw her so clearly, who understood her in ways no one else ever had. "Dr. Harrison told me about his offer," Jake continued. "Denver Music Academy. That's quite an opportunity." Helena heard something in his voice, not quite sadness, but a kind of resigned acceptance that made her heart clench. "You should take it," Jake said firmly. "A talent like yours, it deserves to be recognized. You could have a real career, independence, everything you've earned with your gift." Helena shook her head, frustrated by her inability to speak, to tell him that none of those opportunities mattered if they meant leaving him. "Helena," Jake said, stepping closer, "I need to tell you something. And I know I have no right. No, that you're here for Marcus, but—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. "I'm in love with you," he said finally, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been since the first day I met you, maybe even before that. I know it's wrong, know you're meant for a better man than me, but I can't keep pretending otherwise." Helena's heart stopped, then began racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. Jake loved her. This good, gentle man loved her the way she had begun to love him. "I don't expect anything," Jake continued, misinterpreting her silence, "for rejection. I just need you to know, before you make your decision about the future, whatever you choose, I want it to be with all the facts." Helena reached for him without thinking, her hands grasping the front of his vest. She looked up into his face, trying to pour all her feelings into her eyes, since her voice still failed her. "Helena," Jake said softly, his hands coming up to cover hers. She stood on her toes, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Jake responded, his arms coming around her to pull her closer, Helena felt something break open inside her chest. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not the desperate passion that had led to her downfall in Chicago, but something deeper, steadier, built on understanding and respect and genuine affection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena rested her forehead against Jake's chest. "I love you too," she whispered, the words barely audible but clear enough that Jake heard them. They were the first words she had spoken since arriving in Millbrook, and they changed everything. Helena and Jake walked back into the church social, hand in hand, and Helena felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. Her voice had returned, not gradually, not through therapy or time, but in a single moment of truth when love demanded to be spoken. The words, "I love you too," still echoed in her mind, the first she had uttered since arriving in Colorado. As they entered the main hall, Helena noticed several people glancing their way. News traveled fast in small communities, and she wondered if their absence had been noted, their changed dynamic visible to observant eyes. Virginia appeared almost immediately, her bright smile not quite masking the sharp calculation in her gaze. "There you are. I was beginning to worry. Helena, dear, you simply must meet Mrs. Patterson. She's been raving about your performance." But as Virginia reached for Helena's arm, she noticed the joined hands, the way Jake stood protectively close. Her expression flickered for just a moment before the social mask slid back into place. "How sweet," Virginia said, her voice carrying undertones Helena was only beginning to recognize as dangerous. "Helena," came Marcus's voice from behind them. He approached slowly, his eyes taking in the same details Virginia had noticed. "Jake, everything is all right?" Helena felt Jake's hand tighten around hers, offering strength for what they both knew would be a difficult conversation. She looked at Marcus, this good man who had offered her safety and a place in his life, and saw understanding dawn in his expression. "I think," Marcus said quietly, "we need to talk. All of us." Virginia stepped forward quickly. "Perhaps this isn't the best place." "No," Helena said, her voice soft but clear. "It's time." The simple sentence sent ripples through the small group. Virginia's eyes widened in shock, and Marcus took a step back as if he'd been struck. You're speaking." Sarah's voice came from nearby, filled with wonder and delight. The little girl rushed over, wrapping her arms around Helena's waist. "I knew you would. I just knew it." Helena released Jake's hand to embrace Sarah, tears threatening, as she felt the girl's unconditional joy. Whatever else happened, she would always be grateful for this child's unwavering faith in her. "We should step outside," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "This conversation doesn't need an audience." They made their way to the same quiet garden where Helena and Jake had shared their first kiss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the bare trees, and the sounds of the social seemed distant and unreal. Marcus stood with his back to them for a moment, hands clasped behind him as he stared at the mountains. When he turned around, his expression was resigned rather than angry. "How long?" he asked simply. "Marcus," Jake began, but Marcus held up a hand. "I'm not angry," Marcus said, and Helena was surprised to realize he meant it. "I've seen the way you look at each other, the way you've been since the storm. I suppose I've been willfully blind because it was easier than facing the truth." Helena found her voice again, though it came out rusty from disuse. "I never meant for this to happen. When I came here, I thought I could be what you needed. I wanted to be." "I know," Marcus said gently, "and I appreciate your honesty. But Helena, I need to be honest too. These past few weeks, especially since the storm, I've realized that what I thought I wanted and what I actually need might be different. Things." Virginia, who had been unusually quiet, stepped forward. "Marcus, surely we can discuss this rationally. Miss Montgomery is obviously overwrought from the performance, perhaps not thinking clearly." "Virginia," Marcus said, his voice firm but kind, "I think it's time we all stopped pretending." He turned back to Helena and Jake. I brought you here because I thought I needed a quiet, practical wife who would care for Sarah and help me maintain what I'd built. But watching you these past weeks, seeing the way you've blossomed, I realized I was asking you to be smaller than you are. Helena felt tears slip down her cheeks. You've been nothing but kind to me. Kindness isn't enough, Marcus said. You deserve more than that. You deserve someone who sees all of you, who loves the music and the silence, the strength and the vulnerability. And Jake, he turned to his friend. You've been in love with her since the day you met her. Don't try to deny it. Jake's jaw worked silently for a moment before he nodded. I tried to fight it. I never meant to betray your trust. You didn't betray anything, Marcus said firmly. Hearts choose what they choose. The only betrayal would be forcing something that isn't meant to be. Virginia made a sound of frustration. This is all very romantic but hardly practical. Marcus, you need a wife. Sarah needs a mother, and Miss Montgomery has opportunities waiting for her in Denver that far exceed anything she could find here. Is that what you want, Helena? Marcus asked. Dr. Harrison's offer at the Music Academy, it's a remarkable opportunity. Helena looked at the faces surrounding her. Marcus with his quiet strength, Virginia with her ambitious plans, Jake with his steady love, and Sarah peeking around the corner of the church, clearly eavesdropping. I spent so long running from love, Helena said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I let one man's cruelty convince me I wasn't worth loving, that passion was dangerous and safety was all I deserved. But being here, being with all of you, I've learned that love doesn't have to be destructive. It can be healing. She turned to Jake, taking his hand again. I don't want to go to Denver. I don't want a prestigious position or a brilliant career. If it means leaving what matters most, I want to stay here, with you, with Sarah, building something real. And what about your music? Virginia asked, her tone suggesting this was the killing blow to Helena's romantic fantasies. Helena smiled. Music isn't about concert halls and conservatories. It's about connection, about expressing what words can't say. I can teach children here, play for church socials, share the gift in ways that matter. That's enough for me. Sarah chose that moment to emerge from her hiding spot, running straight to Helena. Does this mean you're going to stay? Forever and ever? Helena knelt to meet the girl at eye level. It means I'm going to stay, if your father will let me. But things will be different than we originally planned. Sarah looked confused, so Marcus crouched down beside them. Sarah, how would you feel if Helena married Jake instead of me? The little girl's eyes grew wide as she processed this information. But then, who would you marry? Marcus glanced at Virginia, who had gone very still. Well, there's a lady who's been very patient with a stubborn rancher who took too long to see what was right in front of him. Virginia's composure finally cracked, revealing genuine surprise and something that might have been hope. Marcus Webb, are you proposing to me in front of witnesses at a church social? I suppose I am, Marcus said, standing and offering Virginia his hand. That is, if you're willing to take on a ready-made family and a man who's finally figured out what he actually wants. Virginia looked at his outstretched hand, then at Helena and Jake, then at Sarah's expectant face. When she smiled, it was the first completely genuine expression Helena had ever seen from her. Yes, Virginia said simply, though I reserve the right to redecorate that kitchen. Sarah clapped her hands in delight. 2 weddings. Can I be in both of them? Can I wear the same dress, or do I need 2 different ones? The adults laughed, and Helena felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. This wasn't how any of them had planned their lives, but somehow it felt exactly right. As winter gave way to spring, the Webb Ranch became the scene of joyful chaos. Virginia threw herself into wedding preparations with the same determination she applied to everything else, while Helena found herself swept up in plans for a double ceremony that had the entire community talking. The two couples decided to marry. On the same day in early May, when the apple trees were in bloom and the meadows were green with new grass. Helena wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, while Virginia had a stunning creation shipped from Denver that made her look like a fairy tale princess. Jake stood at the altar in a new suit that made him look handsome enough to steal breath, and when Helena walked down the aisle to meet him, she saw her future shining in his eyes. Dr. Harrison had made the trip from Denver to attend, and he served as witness when Helena and Jake spoke their vows. "I promise to love your silence and celebrate your voice," Jake said, his words bringing tears to Helena's eyes. "I promise to build a life with you where music and laughter fill every room." "I promise to trust in love again," Helena replied, her voice clear and strong. "I promise to choose courage over fear, and to remember that the best things in life are worth fighting for." When they kissed as husband and wife, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah threw flower petals with abandon, and even the usually composed Virginia was seen wiping away tears. The reception was held in the Webb's yard, now transformed by Virginia's planning into something magical. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by the entire community, and lanterns strung between the trees created pools of warm light as evening fell. Helena played her violin for the dancing, filling the night air with melodies of joy and hope. Between sets, she sat with Jake on the porch steps, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. "No regrets?" Jake asked, his arm around her waist. "None," Helena said firmly. "This is exactly where I belong." Sarah appeared before them, her flower girl dress now thoroughly rumpled from an evening of dancing. "Helena, will you teach me to play the violin?" "Of course," Helena said, pulling the girl close. "We'll start next week." "And Jake, will you teach me to rope cattle like a real cowboy, if your new mama doesn't mind?" Jake said, grinning at Virginia, who was holding court near the dessert table. "Virginia's all right," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "She talks a lot, but she makes Papa smile, and she said she's going to teach me French." Helena laughed, thinking how perfectly this described their new blended family. Virginia did indeed talk a lot, filling the house with chatter and energy, while Marcus had found his smile again in her confident presence. And Helena had found something she'd thought lost forever, not just her voice, but her faith in love. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Helena found herself alone with the violin for a moment. She played softly, a melody that came from her heart rather than any written music. It was a song of gratitude, of healing, of second chances, and unexpected joy. When she finished, she looked up to find Jake watching her with the same expression of wonder he'd worn the first. In time, he heard her play. "What was that piece?" he asked. "Something new," Helena said, setting the violin carefully in its case. "Something that didn't exist until tonight." Jake helped her to her feet, and together they walked toward their future. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warm light, filled with the sounds of family and laughter. Ahead lay years of building, a life together, of raising children and making music and facing whatever challenges came their way. Helena had arrived in Colorado as a broken woman who had lost her voice to heartbreak and betrayal. She was leaving this evening as a wife, a mother, a teacher, and a musician, someone who had learned that silence could be golden, but speaking your truth could be transformative. As Jake helped her into their wagon for the ride to their own small cabin, Helena looked back at the house where her new life had begun. She thought of the wooden box upstairs in her old room, with its painful memories and cruel letter. Tomorrow she would retrieve it, not to hide from the past, but to finally put it to rest. Tonight she had more important things to think about. Tonight was for new beginnings, for love freely given and gratefully received, for the music that would fill their home and the words that would fill their days. Helena Crawford, for that was her name now, settled against her husband's side. As their wagon rolled into the star-filled Colorado night, she had found her voice at last, and she would never be silent again unless she chose to be. Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued, carried on the mountain wind like a promise of all the joy yet to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.